My name is Franklin, and I'm 10 years old. I live in a small Texas town called Meadow Creek, where the Walmart is the busiest place around. One summer evening, my mom asked me to run to Walmart with my older sister Lucy to pick up some groceries for dinner. It was late, almost 9 p.m., but in Texas the heat lingers even after the sun goes down. I loved going to Walmart. The cool air felt nice after the sticky heat, and the brightly lit aisles always seemed endless, filled with things I didn't need but always wanted to look at. Lucy wasn't as excited. She grumbled as she grabbed the list and steered me toward the entrance. The store was quieter than usual, with just a few shoppers wandering around. The lights overhead buzzed softly and the air smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. We grabbed a cart and made our way to the back, where the groceries were. As we walked past the toy section, I noticed someone watching us. A man in a Walmart vest stood at the end of the aisle staring right at us. He was tall, with messy hair and a crooked smile. I nudged Lucy and whispered, "That guy is creeping me out." Lucy glanced over and shrugged. "He's just a worker. Don't be weird, Franklin." But something about the way he looked at us made my stomach twist. We kept walking, checking off items on the list. Every time we turned a corner, I felt like someone was following us. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the man again pretending to straighten some shelves. His eyes were on us the whole time. "Lucy," I whispered, pulling on her arm. "He's still watching us." She sighed and rolled her eyes. "You're imagining things. Let's just get the stuff and leave." I tried to brush it off, but when we reached the dairy section, the man appeared again, just a few feet away. This time he smiled. Only it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind that made me feel like I'd done something wrong. Lucy noticed him now too. Can we help you?" she asked, her voice firm. The man didn't answer. He just tilted his head and kept staring. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. Lucy grabbed my arm. "Let's hurry up and leave," she said, her voice quieter now. As we headed to the self-checkout, I felt uneasy. Every shadow seemed darker, and every noise seemed louder. When we scanned our last item, I glanced back toward the aisles and froze. The man was standing at the edge of the checkout area, watching us again. Lucy grabbed the bags and we hurried out of the store. The parking lot was dimly lit and most of the cars were gone. Our car was parked far at the back because the lot had been full when we arrived. "Let's just get to the car," Lucy muttered, her pace quickening. I stayed close to her, my heart racing. Halfway there, I heard footsteps behind us. When I turned around, the man was following us. His Walmart vest was gone now, and he was holding something in his hand. A small flashlight, maybe. "Lucy!" I gasped, tugging at her arm. She glanced back and saw him. "Run!" she yelled. We sprinted to the car, fumbling with the keys. Lucy managed to unlock the door, and we both jumped in, locking the doors behind us. The man was just a few feet away, standing still under a flickering streetlight. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't know, but we're leaving," Lucy said, starting the car. As we pulled out of the parking lot, the man stood there watching us. His face was blank, but his eyes seemed to burn right through the windshield. By the time we got home, I thought we were safe. Our house was small, nestled at the edge of a quiet neighborhood. Lucy and I brought the groceries inside and tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a car engine outside. I peeked through the blinds and felt my stomach drop. A dark car was parked across the street, and the man from Walmart was sitting in the driver's seat, staring up at our house. I ran to Lucy's room and woke her up. "He's here, the guy from Walmart." She followed me to the window and froze. "Stay here," she said, grabbing her phone. She called the police, her voice trembling as she explained what was happening. I stayed by the window, watching as the man got out of his car and started walking toward our house. "Lucy, he's coming," I whispered, my heart pounding. She grabbed me and locked the front door. We could hear his footsteps on the porch, slow and heavy. Then he knocked. "Franklin," he said, his voice low and calm. "I just want to talk." Lucy held me close, her hand over my mouth to keep me quiet. The knocking grew louder, more frantic. "I know you're in there," the man said. "Open the door, Franklin." "How does he know my name?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know," Lucy whispered back, "but don't make a sound." The police arrived minutes later, though it felt like hours. Their flashing lights lit up the street and the man bolted, running back to his car. The officers chased him, but he was too fast. They searched the area but couldn't find him. They assured us he was gone, but I couldn't stop shaking. How did he know where we lived? How did he know my name? We stayed at a friend's house that night, and my mom decided we'd move soon after. Even now, I can't go to Walmart without feeling like someone is watching me. Sometimes when the house is quiet at night, I think I hear his voice calling my name again. My name is Ross, and I'll never forget the night I went to the 24-hour Walmart in Sunderland. It was a cold, foggy evening, and the streets were mostly empty. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was to grab a few things and head home. I needed a new pair of headphones because my old ones had snapped during a gaming session earlier. The parking lot stretched out like a dark sea, dotted with a few scattered cars. As I stepped out of my car, I could feel the damp air cling to my skin. I glanced around, but the place seemed deserted except for the faint hum of streetlights above. I entered the store, and the bright lights felt almost too harsh after the dimness outside. The aisles were wide and filled with everything you could imagine, but it felt too quiet. There weren't many shoppers, just a couple of employees stocking shelves in the distance. I told myself it was normal. After all, it was nearly midnight. I wandered through the electronics aisle, my shoes squeaking on the polished floor. After a bit of searching, I found a pair of headphones that looked good enough. I lingered for a moment, reading the back of the box, when a strange feeling crept over me. It was as if someone was watching me. I turned around, but no one was there. Shaking off the thought, I paid for the headphones at the self-checkout and left the store. Outside, the parking lot seemed darker than before. The fog had thickened, curling around the streetlights and swallowing the edges of the lot. As I walked to my car, I noticed a man leaning against the wall near the entrance. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and a long coat that looked too thin for the weather. He didn't have a card or any bags, just stood there watching. "Excuse me," the man called out as I passed. His voice was rough, almost as if he had been shouting earlier. I stopped, clutching the bag with my new headphones tighter. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Yeah, could you help me carry something to my car?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward the side of the building. His coat shifted, and I noticed his hand trembling slightly. I hurt my leg earlier and could really use a hand. I hesitated. He looked harmless enough, just someone down on his luck, but something felt off. The way he avoided eye contact made my stomach twist. "Where's your car?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just around the corner," he said, already moving toward the shadowy side of the building. "Come on, it won't take long." Against my better judgment, I followed him, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. We walked along the side of the Walmart building, where the lights didn't reach. It was quiet. The only sounds were our footsteps and the distant hum of cars on the main road. The fog was thicker here, swirling like ghostly fingers around us. "So what happened to your leg?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. "Slipped on some ice earlier," he said without looking back. His voice was flat, almost distracted. We passed the regular parking area and entered a darker part of the lot near the loading docks. A single car sat there, a beat-up old van with rust streaks along the sides. "That's your car?" I asked, stopping in my tracks. "Yeah," he said, turning to face me. His posture was different now, straighter, more confident. The limp he'd been faking was gone. "Go ahead and load the bags into the back." "What bags?" I asked, backing up a step. Before he could answer, the van's side door slid open and another man stepped out. This one was bigger, wearing a hood that cast his face in shadow. My heart sank. "Get in the van," the first man ordered, his voice cold and commanding. I froze, clutching the strap of my bag so tightly my knuckles turned white. "No way," I said, my voice shaking. The bigger man lunged toward me, and I bolted. My legs felt like jelly, but fear gave me speed. I sprinted back toward the main parking lot, hearing their footsteps pounding behind me. I darted around a parked car, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Help!" I shouted, hoping someone, anyone, would hear me. But the lot was empty. The men were closing in. I spotted a chain-link fence at the edge of the lot and ran toward it, my lungs burning. Just as I reached the fence, a hand grabbed my jacket, yanking me back. I screamed, twisting and kicking until I broke free. With a desperate leap, I climbed the fence, scraping my hands on the cold metal. I dropped to the other side, landing hard on the pavement. I didn't stop running until I reached the road, my chest heaving as I pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling so much that it took 3 tries to dial 112, Europe's emergency number. "Someone's after me," I gasped into the phone. "They're at the Walmart loading dock." The operator kept me on the line, asking for details as I stumbled toward a gas station up the road. Within minutes, the flashing lights of a police car appeared in the distance. The officers searched the area but found no sign of the men or their van. They reviewed Walmart's security footage and told me later that the men had driven off shortly after I escaped. I couldn't sleep for days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, felt their hands grabbing at me. I never went back to that Walmart at night again. Even now, years later, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run. Whatever those men had planned, I'm just glad I'll never have to find out. My name's Martin, and this story happened a couple of years ago in Mexico. I was working the night shift at Walmart. It wasn't a fancy job, but it paid enough to keep me going. Most nights were boring. Empty aisles, the buzz of lights, and me just waiting for my shift to end. But this night was different. The store felt strange as soon as I walked in. The air was heavy, and the usual hum of people was missing. Even my co-workers, Pedro and Sofia, seemed quieter than usual. "It's too quiet tonight," Pedro muttered, tapping his fingers on the counter. I laughed nervously. Maybe it's just one of those nights. Around 11 p.m., Sofia came over to the electronics section where I was stacking DVDs. "Martin," she whispered. "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" I asked, pausing to listen. A faint screeching noise echoed from the far end of the store. It sounded like a rusty shopping cart being pushed, but the store was empty. Pedro joined us, rubbing his eyes. "You're just imagining things, Sofia." But I wasn't so sure. Something about the sound made my stomach twist. "Let's check it out," I said. Sofia hesitated, but Pedro nodded. Together we walked toward the sound, each step making the silence around us feel heavier. As we rounded the corner into the home goods aisle, we saw it, a broken, rusted shopping cart sitting in the middle of the floor. "Did someone leave this here?" Sofia asked, her voice trembling. "No way," Pedro replied. "That cart's been in storage for years. I remember because it doesn't roll properly." I stepped closer, and that's when I saw it, a dark trail leading from the cart down the aisle. It wasn't water. It was thicker, darker. My heart started pounding. "Martin," Sofia whispered, clutching my arm. "What is that?" I didn't have an answer. Pedro shook his head. "This is some kind of joke. Someone's messing with us." "Who?" I asked. "The store's locked. No one else is here." The cart suddenly let out a loud screech and moved an inch forward all by itself. Sofia screamed and Pedro jumped back. My mouth went dry. "It's just the air conditioning," Pedro said quickly, but his voice shook. "Air doesn't push carts," I said, stepping closer to the cart. My fingers brushed the handle, and it felt colder than ice. The dark trail leading from the cart seemed to shimmer under the flickering lights. Before we could figure out what was going on, the lights above us started to flicker. The aisle dimmed, then brightened, like the store couldn't decide if it wanted to stay lit. Sofia grabbed my arm. "Martin, I don't like this. Let's call the manager." "No," I said, swallowing hard. "We need to figure out what's going on first. Pedro, grab a flashlight." Pedro hesitated, but finally nodded. As he walked away, the cart let out another screech, louder this time, like nails on glass. It rolled a few more inches toward me, its bent wheel wobbling. "Martin," Sophia whispered, "something's wrong. I can feel it." "I know," I said, keeping my eyes on the cart, "but we need to stay calm." Pedro returned with a flashlight and shined it on the cart. The beam revealed something we hadn't noticed before. A handprint smeared in what looked like blood on the side of the cart. "Okay, I'm done," Pedro said, backing away. "I'm not dealing with this." Before we could decide what to do next, the cart moved again, this time faster. It screeched down the aisle on its own, heading straight for the seasonal section. We followed the cart, our footsteps echoing in the silent store. It stopped near the Halloween display, which was filled with decorations, plastic skeletons, fake spider webs, and a scarecrow mannequin wearing a straw hat. "Did someone set this up to scare us?" Sophia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Pedro shook his head. "I don't know, but I'm not sticking around to find out." As we approached, I noticed the scarecrow's head was tilted, its painted eyes looking right at us. My chest tightened. Suddenly, the cart tipped over, spilling its contents onto the floor. Candles, a black thread spool, a box of salt, and an old, torn book with no title. "What is this stuff?" Sophia asked, bending down to pick up the book. "Don't touch it," I shouted, but it was too late. The lights flickered again, and a loud bang echoed through the store. The scarecrow's arm moved, just a little, but enough to make us freeze. "Did you see that?" Pedro asked, his voice shaking. The scarecrow's head slowly turned toward us. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Sophia's arm. We sprinted down the aisle, Pedro close behind. The sound of straw rustling and heavy footsteps followed us. "Mannequins don't move," Pedro shouted, his voice breaking. "This one does," I yelled back. We ducked into the break room, slamming the door shut. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear Sophia sobbing. "What was that thing?" Pedro asked, pacing back and forth. "I don't know," I said, "but it's not normal." Suddenly the door creaked, and we all froze. A shadow appeared under the door. Then a loud knock. "Who's there?" Sophia whispered. No answer. The door burst open and the scarecrow stood there, its straw arms outstretched. We scrambled to escape, but the scarecrow was too fast. Its straw arms grabbed Pedro, pulling him toward the darkness. "Pedro!" Sophia screamed, but there was nothing we could do. I grabbed Sophia's hand and we ran toward the entrance. The automatic doors didn't open. The scarecrow was right behind us, its straw feet scraping against the floor. Then, just as it reached out for us, the lights flickered one last time, and the store went completely dark. When the lights came back on, the scarecrow was gone. So was Pedro. The police didn't believe us when we told them what happened. They said Pedro probably just walked out of the store and quit. But Sophia and I know the truth. To this day, I can't step into a Walmart without looking over my shoulder. Some things don't belong in our world, and some nights, the shadows come to life. My name is Sora, and I run a small clothing business in Cambodia. Life keeps me busy, but even on my busiest days, I always find time for errands. One evening, after a long day of work, I realized I needed to grab some supplies for a product launch the next morning. It was already 9 p.m., but I figured a quick trip to the nearby superstore wouldn't take long. The superstore, similar to a Walmart, sat on the edge of our small town, surrounded by thick, shadowy trees. The parking lot wasn't crowded. Only a few cars were scattered under the dull, buzzing streetlights. The store itself loomed large and quiet. As I stepped inside, the bright lights made me squint. Everything felt normal. The smell of cleaning products, the faint sound of music playing over the speakers, and the occasional announcement about discounts. I grabbed a cart and made my way to the electronics aisle. I needed a new Bluetooth speaker for the shop, and I wanted to get it before closing time. I felt a slight uneasiness, but I brushed it off. It was late, and the store felt emptier than usual. "Just hurry," I muttered to myself. But that night was far from ordinary. I was examining the speakers when I felt it, a tingling at the back of my neck like someone was watching me. Slowly, I turned my head. Across the aisle, I saw a man standing near the shelves. He was tall, with unkempt hair and a torn jacket. His face was shadowed, but his eyes seemed to be fixed on me. I tried to ignore him, but his presence was unsettling. He wasn't holding anything, just standing there, motionless. I quickly grabbed the speaker I needed and moved to another section. Yet every time I looked over my shoulder, I saw him. He was always a few steps behind, his figure blending into the dimmer parts of the store. I tried to stay calm, telling myself, "It's just a coincidence." But when I reached the self-checkout area, he was there too. He stood at the edge of the counters, staring. "Excuse me, can I help you?" I asked, my voice firm but shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he smiled, a strange, crooked smile that made my stomach twist. Then he turned and walked out of the store. Relieved, I quickly paid for my items and left. But as I stepped into the parking lot, I saw him again. He was leaning against a lamppost, his face partially hidden by shadows. The parking lot felt much darker than before. I walked briskly toward my car, clutching my bag tightly. The man didn't move, but I could feel his eyes on me. "Just get to the car," I whispered to myself. As I approached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. My heart began to race. I glanced back and saw him walking slowly toward me, his hands in his pockets. "Hey!" I called out, trying to sound brave. "What do you want?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stopped, tilted his head, and gave me that same crooked smile. Panic set in. I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the car. The footsteps grew louder. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, swinging my bag wildly. It hit the man's arm and he stumbled back. His smile faded, replaced by a dark, angry look. "Leave me alone!" I shouted, jumping into my car and locking the doors. But as I started the engine, he stood in front of the car, staring at me through the windshield. I didn't wait. I pressed the accelerator, forcing him to move out of the way. My tires screeched as I sped out of the parking lot. My hands were trembling and my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own thoughts. As I drove down the empty road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My stomach dropped when I saw headlights behind me. The man was following me in an old, beat-up car. I tried to stay calm, taking turns at random to lose him. But no matter where I went, his car stayed close behind. The dark roads felt endless, and the trees on either side seemed to close in, trapping me. I finally reached a busier street and spotted a police station. Without hesitation, I turned into the parking lot and stopped the car. The man's car slowed down but didn't pull in. Instead, he drove past, his shadowy figure disappearing into the night. I sat there for a moment, catching my breath. The officers inside were kind, but they couldn't do much. "If he comes back or you see him again, call us immediately," one of them said. I made it home safely that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. Every sound outside my window, every shadow on the wall made my heart race. A week later, I heard from the police. They found the man's car abandoned near the edge of town, but there was no sign of him. Even now, I wonder what he wanted. Was it robbery? Something worse? I'll never know. What I do know is that I'll never forget his face, his smile, and the way he followed me through the night. And I'll never go shopping alone after dark again. My name is George, and I work as a doctor in a small town in Spain. But that night I wasn't in my usual environment. It was my night off, and I had promised my wife, Carmen, and our 2 daughters, Elena and Sophia, that I'd be home early. But things didn't go as planned. It was late, almost midnight, when I decided to run a quick errand to the local Walmart. The store was one of those big, bright places, open 24 hours. I figured I'd grab a few things we needed and be back in no time. I wasn't expecting much. It was just another ordinary trip to the store. Or so I thought. As I walked through the automatic doors, a strange unease crept up on me. The store was unusually quiet for a place that should have been bustling with people at this hour. I noticed the lights flickering slightly, but I shrugged it off, assuming it was just the usual wear and tear. I grabbed a cart and began moving through the aisles, picking up milk, bread, and some snacks for the girls. But as I moved deeper into the store, I saw him. A man, standing at the end of the aisle, staring at me. His clothes were strange, like something from a different time. An old, worn jacket and boots that seemed too heavy for a place like this. His eyes, dark and hollow, were fixed on me. I tried not to make it obvious that I noticed him, but something about the way he stood there, unmoving, made me feel like I wasn't alone. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks. But that uneasy feeling didn't go away. The man appeared every night at exactly 11:55 p.m., always buying the same 3 items: a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, and a packet of aspirin. It was strange. I had seen him many times before, but each time, I couldn't help but feel like something was off. One night, I decided to follow him. I had to know what was going on. So, I stayed behind him, at a safe distance, trying not to alert him to my presence. The store seemed to get quieter as I moved with him, the buzzing of the lights the only sound in the stillness. I watched him move down the aisles slowly, methodically. It was like he was in a trance. And then, just as always, he picked up the same items: milk, bread, aspirin. Same price every time. It was $7.47 down to the cent. But tonight was different. As he made his way to the checkout, I noticed something strange. His face, what was once rough and weathered, was now smoother. He looked younger, almost like the years had been reversed. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat on my brow. It was like looking at someone who wasn't quite human. When he reached the self-checkout, I finally approached him. "Why do you do this every night?" I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something in me freeze. His face began to change. It wasn't just the aging process, it was like his features were shifting. His lips parted and he whispered, "You're next." Before I could react, he vanished, just like that, into thin air. The next night I came back to Walmart hoping it was all just a strange dream. But when I walked through the doors, something felt wrong. The store was empty, eerily quiet. The lights flickered, and a strange sensation crawled up my spine. And there he was, the man, standing by the entrance staring at me with those hollow eyes. But this time, he wasn't moving. He was just watching. I took a deep breath and tried to walk past him, pretending not to notice. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was pulling me toward him. It was like I had no control over my body. I had to know what was going on. I turned a corner, hoping to lose sight of him. But when I did, he was gone, completely vanished. I ran up and down the aisles searching for him, but it was like he had disappeared into thin air. My heart pounded as I searched every aisle, but there was no trace of him. Only silence. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not from any of the other customers, because there weren't any customers. I spun around, but there was nothing. The aisles stretched out, empty, cold. The lights flickered again, and the buzzing of the refrigerators seemed muffled. It was like the store was holding its breath. The next night, I decided to confront him. I couldn't let this go on any longer. I had to know what he was doing here, why he kept coming back, why he was always buying the same things. But when I saw him, something was different. He wasn't just buying his usual items. This time, he picked up a can of soup and stared at it for a long time before putting it back. It was subtle, but it was enough to send a wave of panic through me. What did it mean? I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something in my gut told me I was on the verge of discovering something I shouldn't. I watched him as he moved through the aisles, moving toward the checkout. I couldn't help myself. I followed him again, keeping my distance, not wanting to alert him to my presence. But my eyes never left him. And then, it happened. As he turned toward the self-checkout, I asked, "Why do you do this every night?" His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment his face shifted. No, changed completely. His features morphed into something not human, something ancient, something I didn't understand. He leaned in close, his breath cold against my skin. "You're next," he whispered. And before I could react, he was gone. Vanished. The store had changed. It didn't feel the same anymore. The lights flickered constantly. The aisles stretched out, impossibly long, like the store had become a labyrinth. I couldn't find the exit no matter how hard I looked. The door was locked, and I couldn't remember the last time I saw the outside world. Then, I saw him again. But this time, he wasn't alone. There were others, figures, standing in the aisles watching me. Their faces were blank, their eyes hollow. They were the shoppers who had never left, stuck in the endless cycle of this place. And now, I was one of them. "You're one of us now," he whispered from the shadows. "You'll never leave." I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. I was trapped. There was no escape. The store felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. The air was thick and heavy, and the lights flickered endlessly. And in that moment, I understood. The man, the shoppers, they were all part of the same endless cycle. And now, so was I. I was the forever shopper, and I would never leave.